Good evening, everyone. To my esteemed co-panelists, thank you for the opportunity to present. At the outset, I'd like to say that my presentation will cover more questions rather than solutions, because I think that is more of where we are as a group in terms of our sustainability journey. Before I get into the specifics, I think many of you know Godrej as a household name, in terms of a brand. So essentially what we represent here is 4 different unique businesses, one of which, the biggest one, is Godrej Consumer Products, which is the most obvious one that most of you would have seen, which includes your soaps like Synthol, your insect repellents like Hit or Goodnight. That's from the Godrej Consumer Products. Then there is another business called Godrej Agrovet Limited, which itself consists of 7 different businesses in crop protection, animal feed, aqua, dairy, ready-to-eat foods, poultry. Then there is a B2B business in the oleochemical sector, and then there is a properties business, which is more developing and commercial and residential real estate. So before I get to what is net zero, I think most people already know what it is. I'm not going to spend too much time on these definitions, but the journey of sustainability at Godrej formally began in 2011. Many of you who know the company well know that social and environmental impact has been at the forefront of the family for a very, very long time, even before the world moved into the entire ESG domain. But if you want to trace the actual formal journey of sustainability, it began in 2011 with the creation of the Good and Green program. Good, speaking about the social impact, and green, of course, talking about the environmental impact that we have on the planet. We set ourselves a fairly ambitious target for the first 10 years, from 2011 to 20, which was to aim to reduce our emissions, to reduce specific emissions, reduce our specific energy, increase our renewable energy to about 30% of our portfolio, become a water-positive company, and ensure there was no waste that we sent to landfills. We have been, I would say, fairly successful. 90% of our targets we have met. There have been a lot of learnings along the way, which is what has framed our second phase of sustainability, which we are in right now, from 2021 to 26. All the 4 group companies are signatories to the Science Based Targets Initiative and have committed to reducing the absolute scope 1, 2 emissions in line with the global push towards keeping the temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what the previous speaker spoke about, the whole 1.5 degree question. In terms of water, we've been exceedingly good. We undertook 4 watershed programs in some of the most drought-struck districts in India, in Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and as well as in Maharashtra, in Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra, and Karnataka, yeah. And we have actually become 7.5 times water positive as a company. What we mean by that is for every liter of water that we withdraw from the ground, we are adding 7.5 liters back. So this has been a major success story. And what is really interesting is that we've now been able to convert all of these watersheds into carbon sinks. We're actually sequestering carbon in these watersheds. So it has had secondary, tertiary, quaternary benefits. So net zero is now our commitment and our target for 2035. As a group, we are committed to being net zero by 2035, which is also the deadline for the achievement of our science-based targets. Not only will we be net zero by 2035, we will actually be carbon positive, thanks largely to a very interesting development in the area of our palm oil plantation. So before I speak on the presentation, a very interesting development, which something I came across a month or so ago when I was reading up about global palm oil and the carbon emissions associated with it. It's very interesting to note that countries like Colombia actually report a negative emission factor for palm oil. The reason for this is they're actually sequestering carbon in their palm oil plantations itself. So where there is no deforestation, you're actually able to retain a lot of the carbon in the embedded ecosystem of the oil palm plantation. You can actually reverse the carbon emission cycle. And I think it's a huge opportunity, especially in India, because as many of you know, there is I think 99% of our agriculture is zero deforestation. It's extremely formally regulated. It's very tightly regulated. You can't convert any forest land into agricultural land without the government's permission. And with that in mind, I think there is a massive opportunity for India to look at palm oil plantations as a major carbon sink. So essentially, there are three pathways that we followed to achieve our emissions reduction or net zero. And this is something that almost all companies will look at. But there are some real interesting insights into this. One of which, obviously, the first and most obvious one is the adoption of green energy, which is something the previous speaker, Mr. Ray, spoke about as well. We are currently at about 52% renewable energy as a company. And by 2025, we will be at 70%. But the really interesting aspect of that is most of it has been driven by our thermal energy requirements. Typically, the amount of thermal energy to electrical energy we use is 70 to 30. And 95% of our thermal energy now comes from biomass. So we have completely phased out coal. We use no coal at all. And we are using local agri-waste, be it bagasse in some regions, groundnut waste in some other regions. And from our own oil palm plantation, converting the palm oil kernel into briquettes for use in our boilers and cogeneration. We've been able to really achieve huge amounts of success in thermal renewable energy at least. On electrical renewable, it's been a bit more of a challenge. The reason for this is largely because of regulatory restrictions. If somebody were to ask me, you would be at 70% renewable energy by 2025, but can't you go 100%? The answer to that really lies in regulation, because the way that regulations are structured across states right now, it's almost impossible to go 100% renewable. So that's something we're working on with the government, with our representations to them through various industry bodies. But again, cogeneration through agri-waste can be a real driver in this space. Because the more I hear about, in all these sessions that I've been a part of during this event, there is tremendous potential for converting the entire agriculture economy into a completely circular one. What I mean by that is utilizing agri-waste in a very efficient manner to convert it into biogas or biomass fuel rather than burn it, which was the rather sad prevalent practice for many years. In fact, we've taken up a CSR project in Punjab right now, converting about 1,000 hectares of land which had crop stubble which is being burned, and converting it into biomass for use in local industries. So if that is scaled up, and if there's a real plan to bring circularity to the agri-economy, I think we can solve the twin problems of air pollution due to stubble burning, as well as really giving a push to the biomass and the bioenergy economy. But surprisingly, the one area of net zero which many people tend to ignore is actually energy efficiency. And we did a bit of a back of the envelope calculation. And energy efficiency has actually helped us reduce our emissions by 20% more than green energy has. So while we continue focusing on replacing fossil fuel energy or to go into greener forms of energy, we must not take our eyes off the ball when it comes to improving energy efficiency. And this really requires investment. It requires adoption of cutting-edge technologies. It really involves looking at a lot of use of digitization, automation, IoT, blockchain, some of these technologies to really drive efficiencies on a real-time basis in the energy value chain. And the third one, of course, is sequestration or offsets. Now, offsets is a very tricky subject. There is always the issue of greenwashing that's raised when you speak about offsets. Because for many people, they feel that rather than reducing emissions, it's much more easy to buy carbon credits and offset your emissions rather than spend any effort on reducing. While that is a problem, I would not rule out offsets entirely as a mechanism for achieving net zero, because without that, I really don't see a pathway to net zero. If you want to become a zero emission company, state, or a country, there is room for sequestration, provided it is measurable, validated correctly, and it is unaltered for at least a period of 20 to 25 years. We've done several carbon sequestration projects in watersheds, like I mentioned, also through afforestation programs. And very interestingly, now we are looking at a new technology for small-scale carbon capture, which is using a particular kind of algae which captures atmospheric CO2 and converts it into spirulina, which has a lot of applications in both the food industry as well as in dyes, in paints, and things like that. So through a combination of these three pathways, we've charted out our net zero target for 2035. So like I mentioned, 60% of our energy comes from renewable energy right now. We haven't really explored the idea of storage or green hydrogen to a commercial scale yet. One of the reasons being essentially that we're not a very energy intensive industry, unlike cement or steel. So for us, it's a lot of distributed facilities which use a lot of smaller amounts of energy rather than very, very high emission or high energy intensive industries. But we are looking to the national grid and to utility level storage as an option for really driving up this number even further, even with the existing regulations in place. We've reduced our emissions intensity by about 55% over the last 10 years, and we're targeting another 20% over the next 5 years. I already mentioned we've committed to our science-based targets, so we will be achieving that well before the deadline. And our energy efficiency improvements have been about 20% since the baseline taken in the year 2020. We are also signatories to the EP100 global commitment, which is doubling our energy productivity by 2030 as against the baseline of 2018. Like I mentioned earlier, this has been the biggest driver, more so than even the renewable energy aspect of reducing our emissions, and really the biggest push towards our net zero pathway. So what is the ask that we have right now? And like I mentioned, this is more about the questions that we have for the industry at large, for solution providers, for academia to really work on. The first aspect, of course, is storage. And how does storage work at a micro to a macro level? When I'm saying storage, it does not necessarily have to be the typical battery storage or even lithium ion. We can look at things like hydraulic storage, or even looking at the potential of water as a storage unit, or even older mines which have been used as compressed storage. So there's a lot of avenues available, but this is something that the technology and the techno-commercial aspect of it really hasn't evolved yet. So I think that is something that we really need a lot of help on in terms of technology and in terms of inputs from the innovators and the solution providers that are available. And now coming to the main discussion point of this entire seminar is on biofuels and on our entire journey towards moving our thermal energy to biomass. While it sounds great on paper that we've converted almost all of our thermal energy requirements to biomass, it comes with its own set of challenges. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is just talking about the various kinds of biofuels we've used. Now, this was a classic case of bringing complete circularity from our oil palm business. So here, the oil palm fresh fruit bunch is actually grown by us with the farmers in partnership. And we have taken up 65,000 additional hectares now under the National Palm Oil Mission, where we actually harvest these fresh fruit bunches, extract the oil from them. The remaining kernel is then either chipped to use as chips in boilers, or it's converted into biomass briquettes, which is either sold or then used internally. Once the biomass is used in the boiler, the ash is actually refortified with nutrients and other minerals, and then used back to the farmers as fertilizer, as natural fertilizer. So this is a classic example of an almost completely circular economy. So this is the approach we're trying to bring to all of our other businesses as much as possible. And being a significant player in the agri space, we feel that there is a lot more that we can do, especially in a country like India, where the agri linkages still aren't fully established, and we haven't even really explored the potential of really utilizing the entire agri economy to its fullest. Now, what are some of the challenges that we face in biofuels? The first is the availability and the quality of biomass. It's all well and good to say, we must shift from coal to cleaner forms of energy, including biomass. But with the increasing demand, there is also a shortfall in supply. And there's also an issue of quality of biomass because there is no real standard around it. There is a lot of ash content which comes with biomass, which poses a different challenge on its own. The calorific values tend to be very, very variable. You need to test almost every single sample of biomass that you receive for quality. That's how variable it is. And during the monsoons especially, it becomes very difficult because of the high moisture content in a lot of this biomass, which makes the efficiency of the boiler is very low. So I think this is one of the major challenges that we face. The calorific value of biomass in general does not tend to be near that of fossil fuels. However, we are exploring cultivating certain tissue cultures of bamboo, which can equal the calorific value of coal, while actually keeping the ash content as low as 3%. So this, similar kinds of really cultivated biomass, which can be really explored by academia, would be a big, big game changer when it comes to solving the biomass issue. The supply chain and storage of biomass also represents a rather complicated problem, because it's not easily available in the locations where it's needed. The linkages to market are often very, very, I would say, fragmented. For example, in Punjab, where we're doing the project on stubble collection, the market linkages and the costs of really bringing the logistics of carrying the biomass from the farmers to the plant, and converting the biomass there to briquettes, and then converting the briquettes into usable fuel and transporting that to the end user is a very, very complicated and very costly affair. So bringing a more formal market economy to this entire value chain is something that's going to be very, very difficult. It's a big challenge. But this is something that can be done at a state and a central level. So this would be a great project for the government to take up. And this is probably the largest and the most expensive problem when it comes to biomass, is the actual ash disposal. Typically, the biomass that we use comes with an ash content of about 15%. And the cost of disposing this biomass is often a big deterrent when it comes to even the cost of overall fuel. Now, there are several technology options available in converting this ash either back, like I said, into fertilizer for use in agriculture, or even exploring the use of it as embedded carbon, or even in the construction industry, where it can be used to make bricks for construction. But these are all still very, very informal and on a very small scale. So for the kind of adoption of biomass that we are envisaging over the next 10, 15 years, this is going to be a major challenge about how do we really, really reutilize that ash. Because there has to be a much, much more robust mechanism than landfilling, because we'll run out of space very soon on that. On the challenges and the learnings that we've had on net zero, the only thing I would like to say is that making a start is much more important than looking at the net zero goal as a whole. What I mean by that is when you speak to a lot of companies about setting net zero targets, the first response you typically get is, oh, it's too difficult to achieve. We don't have the resources, we don't have the capex to invest, and it's very difficult for us to get to net zero. But what I would argue is that getting 80% of the way is not a very expensive affair. So never let perfect be the enemy of good. So in aiming for net zero, let's not lose sight of the fact that 80% of the way to net zero can be achieved with very little investment, with the resources that are already there, with the kind of alternatives to high emission sources of fuels that's already available. There is a huge option to switch to that immediately. I don't think we need to worry so much about the costs or the investments required for that. The remaining 20%, we can get there once we get to this 80%. So what I would say to most companies who are looking to start off on their net zero journey or set net zero targets is do not be intimidated by the final goal. Secondly, and I mentioned this in my initial comments, the real importance of data monitoring and measurement. Right? Without that, this entire exercise is meaningless. So when we say net zero, how are we really measuring it? How are we measuring our emissions, and how are we getting it validated? It's all very well to make claims about reduced emissions or make claims about carbon being sequestered. But unless that's validated by a credible external agency, we will not see any real movement or any real action happening or any real movement on the needle. I very often get asked this question in many forums, that if all the companies in their annual reports claim to be doing so well on sustainability, then why are we still in a very terrible situation? And that's a very important question, because clearly we're all missing some part of the puzzle. So transparency and increased disclosure of emissions data, energy data is very, very critical. The recent expansion of the reporting guidelines by SEBI, which is the BRSR, which many of you are probably familiar with, is a very good step in that direction, which increases both the breadth as well as the depth of sustainability reporting. So the wider the net and the more detailed the information that is published, you will start seeing real accountability coming there. So I think that is very critical. So the final messaging I would give on this is that the agri sector represents a huge potential in terms of India achieving its net zero targets. The solutions are already there, and the ones that aren't there right now will be developed over the next 5 to 10 years. It requires investment, it requires greater organization, and it requires a lot of coalescence of various bodies and various institutions. And it definitely looks a very challenging target, but there's no reason why we can't get closer to it at least before we throw our hands up in defeat. Thank you.